Hi, this is Tom. Welcome back to Bryn Mawr RC. As always, thank you for watching. Please consider subscribing as well. This week we're continuing our TRX4 chassis build, and this week we're going to finish up the wiring and install the front and rear suspensions. Taking a look at the overall build steps, we are just finishing up the electronics installation and moving on to the suspension and drive line. Although this week we're just going to be able to get the suspension complete. As you can see, we've been moving through this build fairly rapidly, all things considered. This week, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about final wiring and receiver box closure, the final ESC location, which is not typical. It's special for my build. We're going to build the shocks, and then we're going to build and install the suspension. Actually, the first three steps of G I've already done off camera, and that is the first step, G1, is simply just putting the shocks or the dampers together. Now, most of it is already together, nothing very special here. Mainly just removing the shock cap, placing in the oil, placing on the spring, and the spring pretensioner. Pretty straightforward. I did that on all four. Here's the two rear dampers, and I've already placed on the two dampers for the front. The only interesting part on making or assembling of the dampers is the left front has a slightly different setting for the pretensioner. So then on step 2, step G2, we actually added the front lower suspension links. This is the front axle here. And step 2, we simply attached these two links. And again, these are the front lower suspension links. Then on step 3, we're attaching the steering linkage, the Panhard, and the upper suspension. So this item here is the steering link. This here is the Panhard. And this is the front upper suspension. Panhard, front upper suspension, and the steering link. So if we look at this, we can see here why this is called a 3-link suspension. 2 lower here and the upper with a Panhard. Moving on to step G4, we're going to attach the front axle assembly to the chassis. I have the chassis flipped upside down, and this is the front. See the underneath of the motor here. You can see the top or bottom of the servo with the servo horn here. And we're going to be placing in the front transmission. So here we go. So First, let's iron this thing out. This will be the placement as we put it on. The dampers and shocks will drop into this area here and be tightened down from the back. Here, tightened down from the back. And this is the location for the end of the lower links, which I think this is effectively the skid plate that we applied in step E. So let's go ahead and we'll just first roughly place this where it needs to be. And I'm going to do that by swinging all this stuff out of the way, roughly placing it where it should be. As we can see here, the rear suspension in pictures, as we mentioned before, the rear suspension assembly uses the 4-link suspension, 2 upper and 2 lower. And these are just pictures of that completed suspension. One item that I thought I would share that was of interest is actually installing the final support for the rear suspension. Actually required me to loosen the frame on that particular side, the frame rails, to actually get that screw in. So let me explain here. Here is a picture of the rear suspension, and you can see the final the final screw, the final length that I tightened up was this rear upper link suspension here. And to support that, the screw comes from this side, goes through the frame rail into that support, through the link, and then bites down into the far side of the support. I was unable to get that screw to go in and to go in correctly and sink into that plastic. I was unable to do that until I loosened this screw here that puts the frame rail, that ties the frame rail into the transmission box, and this screw back here, which is tying into the battery box. So I had to loosen those 2 screws, put this last upper link screw in and start it, and then tighten up simultaneously, if you will, round robin, all 3 of those screws on this side of the frame rail. So it's just a little interesting deviation I had to do to get that correct. I did, for some reason I didn't expect that, although I've built enough things to know that sometimes you need to do this. Anyway, that was the special activity I had to take for the rear suspension. We're complete for this week. Thank you so much for joining. Stay safe, be well, and come back again next week for our next video on Bryn Mawr RC. Thanks. Bye.